coast to coast right around Australia. Welcome to Chris Conroy's World of Boats.
Hi, welcome aboard. Just about everybody owns a car. Now, most people use their car as a means of transport to go to work and back to do the shopping and for the occasional outing. In other words, they use their car as a conveyance. But there's a vast band of people worldwide who are really dedicated to the motor car. Their car is not just a means of transport, it becomes a sport, a recreation, or a hobby. There are many types of motorsport, from road racing to go-karts, but one of the most accessible and enjoyable is rallying. As with all other forms of motorsport, each activity has different classes and levels, and this is just as true of rallying, but the basic rules remain the same. The crew consists of a driver and a navigator. At the beginning of each section, the navigator is given a set of directions which tell him what to do at various distances from the start. For instance, this sheet says that at 16.83 kilometres from the start, he should turn left. At 18.24 kilometres, there's a cattle grid, and at 19.37 kilometres, there is a control point. A time is set for each section, and points are lost for late arrival. There's a World Rally circuit with the latest cars being modified to make them competitive, but there's also a strong interest in rallying older cars, and this is where our story starts. The Endeavour Foundation is a voluntary organisation dedicated to the support of intellectually handicapped people. They have a series of establishments around Queensland called sheltered workshops, in which a range of skills are taught and products made for sale to help support the foundation. Whilst this enterprise is successful, it doesn't quite generate enough income, so each year a Great Endeavour Rally is run, the proceeds of which are represented to the foundation. The rally's confined to cars which were made before 1970, with penalties for later models, and this year around 140 cars of all descriptions departed Toowoomba on a marathon 6,000 kilometre journey which was to test cars, patience and endurance. One of the interesting and fun aspects of the rally is the fact that each competitor pays a $1,250 entry fee, half of which goes to the Endeavour Foundation, and at any time along the course they can be fined either for early arrival, late arrival, or a whole range of misdemeanours, whether real or imagined. This is done at a kangaroo court at which I had the honour of presiding as His Honour, and I promise you it was a very amusing and interesting and incidentally profitable exercise for the Endeavour Foundation. The Great Endeavour is split into several sections. There is an out-and-out rally section with cars tuned and equipped to the highest standards and crews dedicated to winning. There's a fun section with a variety of wacky and unusual vehicles, most of which follow the full course, and there is a tour section in which the roughest roads are avoided. Each day a wacko section is incorporated into the route. These feature obstacles such as water crossings, cattle grids, rough roads and mountain sections. The first car departed Toowoomba at 10 a.m. on Friday the 13th of July, a propitious date I might say, with a field of 140 cars following at 1 minute intervals. One of the most interesting entries was a Model A Ford, entered by Rod Wade of the Gold Coast and driven by a Japanese crew comprising Akira Hasegawa as navigator and Hitoshi Sazai as driver. The 1928 model Ford, built from a collection of parts for the rally by Rod Wade, acquitted herself very well. Hitoshi, one of Japan's most successful saloon car racing drivers, showed his abilities with the old car to such an extent that it not only had a trouble-free run, but won the rally. The first wacko was encountered almost as soon as the field left Toowoomba and set the scene for those which were to follow. Day one finished at the pretty town of Springshaw, with most of the cars passing through the last checkpoint after dark and proceeding to the showground for dinner and repairs. In some cases the crews worked all night. In this case the E.H. Holden, driven by the Arabs, had rolled the night before and is here undergoing some violent straightening out. Miraculously, the E.H. and the Arabs finished the course in spite of several further excursions into the boondocks. The Arabs were just as ruthless at collecting money for the foundation, at one stage hijacking the coach carrying children from the foundation and holding it for ransom. This secured quite a handsome donation for the foundation, and the children found it a delightful experience. An Austin 1800 suffered terminal damage during the first day. A local garage proprietor at Springshaw mentioned that he knew where there was one which had lain in a local paddock for the last 15 years or so. This was purchased for $50 and an all-night session had it rolling the next day. It too finished the course. An early departure the next morning saw the field heading for Stonehenge via Tambo over roads which had been closed by the recent floods. We had our first real taste of the dust, which was to stay with us for the rest of the trip. The second night at Stonehenge gave the cruise a true taste of outback living, with drivers and navigators curling up in sleeping bags beside the cars. The third day took the field through Longreach and Winton to Kynuna. A lunch stop at Longreach gave us the opportunity to visit the Stockman's Hall of Fame. This monument to the pioneers who opened up the vast and inhospitable reaches of outback Australia tells the story in a series of dioramas and displays and captures the spirit and feel of deprivation and hardship, distance and achievement which still characterise our outback. Here we moved into the Channel Country and for the first time gained a true impression of the vast size of the land. The road runs straight and true with the occasional slight rise. At a closing speed of 200 kilometres an hour, an approaching car can sometimes be seen for 20 minutes or so before it's passed. This happens particularly at night. The town of Winton once again showed the depth of country hospitality and support for the foundation, with parts appearing as if by magic and the local garage proprietor staying up all night to help replace a differential and then refusing payment. We'll be back with more right after this break. Welcome back. Kynuna is one of those remote dots on the map with a name against it. It comprises a couple of caravan parks, some houses and the Blue Heeler Hotel. It's actually an overnight stop for the cattle road trains which drive all over the area and is the gateway to the southwestern Queensland opal fields. The rally cars began arriving late in the afternoon and by nightfall the population of the town had tripled. Preparations had been thorough, with the ladies of the district putting on a fine spread, and we all settled down to enjoying the evening's festivities, which included the Kynuna Gift, a semi-nude race along the highway in temperatures approaching zero. Once again, work on some of the cars continued through the night, and several crews were still working at daybreak. Just after dawn, the cars began departing on the long 627 kilometre haul to the Lynn Junction via Julia Creek. This rally gave me a chance to cover some country I'd never seen before. We'd never really been west before. And I was absolutely struck by the vastness of Queensland and its beauty. Narvan Gorge, located about 7.5 hours drive from Brisbane to the north of Roma, is one of those natural wonders for which Australia is famous. The result of hundreds of thousands of years of erosion, the gorge is a haven for a range of Australian wildlife, as well as affording breathtaking views. The National Parks and Wildlife Service controls the gorge and has provided a series of walking trails which allow you to penetrate well into the wilderness. Caves display some of the best preserved examples of Aboriginal art and the flora is magnificent. Accommodations available at the Oasis Lodge and excellent camping facilities are provided, including hot showers. Moving further north, the little-known Porcupine Gorge is located about 80 kilometres north of Hughenden. The steep sides and difficult access along the riverbed confine viewing to a specially prepared platform overlooking the gorge, and an element of added excitement is provided by the fact that this is the area in which Australia's only complete dinosaur skeleton was found. Speaking of early days, this public park in Richmond had a fascinating display of early farm engines along with an iron flood relief boat. About 5 metres long, the vessel was of riveted construction with a flat bottom and was powered by a 4-cylinder overhead valve Chev car engine. In fact, the entire front section of the chassis, including engine and gearbox, was installed, driving a conventional propeller. My good friend Terry Payton of Gatton, who knows about these things, tells me that these boats were built by the hundreds in the outback for flood relief duties. I'd certainly appreciate any further information. Charters Towers on the tablelands to the west of Townsville is one of the prettiest towns I've seen, with some beautifully preserved examples of early Queensland architecture. Our interest was caught by a large hill behind the town, with the crumbling remains of a large brick structure. Charter Towers was the base for a B-25 squadron during the war, with 15,000 Americans stationed here. The brick structure was the chimney stack of a felspar mine on the hill. It was quite tall and caused a potential hazard to the B-25s on their landing approach, so it was removed by the simple expedient of placing several explosive charges inside and blowing it up. Back to the rally. The Lynn Junction is remote indeed. Crews received the same support and hospitality as they did at every overnight stop on the journey, and they left early the next morning for a transit leg to Townsville. The motto of this year's great endeavour was Toowoomba to the Gold Coast via Magnetic Island, or SINK. Accordingly, most of the cars were loaded onto barges to make the trip across the water to beautiful Magnetic Island. The island is actually a suburb of Townsville. Many of the residents commute by fast ferry each day to the city and live in a tropical paradise. The lay day, which was the next day of the rally, was appreciated by the contestants who had a chance to have a rest, and they used it to prepare the cars for the run home and to enjoy the beauties of the island. We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back. The run home, taking 3 days, was to take us from Townsville inland to Claremont. This moved us into the tableland area of the Great Dividing Range. A comparatively easy 505 k's, there were still some surprises in store. For instance, the instructions said that there are 100 k's of dirt road. What it didn't say was that 100 kilometres was extremely rough and involved a visit to Mount Coolon. This tiny town is the centre of the cattle industry in the district, and we all enjoyed a magnificent spread at the pub for lunch. This old building down the back of Mount Coolon used to be the Picture Theatre. This rich tableland area produces a variety of crops. Blair Atoll, just to the north of Claremont, has one of the largest open-cut coal mines in Queensland. The rivers and creeks were the scene of a large-scale gold rush during the last century, and there are many beef cattle properties and dairies in the district. This working gold mine, looking for all the world like a spaceship rising from the plain, is located 100 k's to the north. Once again, Claremont Showground was our home for the night, and the ladies did a superb job preparing meals for around about 300 people. The hospitality was magnificent, and during breakfast we were treated to a display of camp drafting at the showground. Claremont is just to the north of Emerald and has a fascinating history. Established in 1863, it was a rollicking gold town built along the flats by Sandy Creek. It was damaged by floods towards the end of the last century, to the extent that the idea of moving the town was discussed, but nothing was done until 1916. At this time the town was well established with a population of 1,500, the diggings were still yielding gold, and the surrounding area was producing grain and beef. On the 28th of December, a devastating flood hit the town, with the water rising to a height of 4 metres in the incredibly short time of 1 hour. 65 people were drowned. On a pro rata basis, the equivalent of 20,000 people being drowned in the 1974 Brisbane flood, and tales of heroism and tragedy were common. When the water receded, the decision was finally taken to move the town to higher ground. This was done in a most unusual way. Rather than rebuild on the new site, the remaining buildings were moved intact using steam traction engines which winched them along timber tracks. This was a slow process and the people of the town lived in their houses. It was business as usual at the pub and the postman made his rounds whilst Claremont was underway. This traction engine, preserved at the old site, was one of the ones involved, and these glass plate photos, remarkably well preserved even though they were submerged, were taken by Gordon Puller, a shopkeeper. They form a graphic record of the move as well as life in Claremont in the early days. They're published in the book A Shifting Town by Richard and Marguerite Stringer, published by University of Queensland Press. The remaining 2 days were more of the same. Long days at the wheel, plenty of wacko sections, and by this time, of course, the crews were getting quite tired. The course took us down the tablelands to Mount Perry, a very tiny town in the mountains there, and on the way to Mount Perry we negotiated one of the worst wacko sections in the entire rally. The last night was spent at Mount Perry, and then the cars made their way down the highway for a bit of relief to the finish at Surfers Paradise. The field was greeted in Surfers Paradise by Mr Don Nicol of the Endeavour Foundation, and a prize-giving ceremony was held that evening at SeaWorld. While we're looking at some of the action footage from the rally, I'll give you a list of some of the major first prize winners. Class C two-wheel drive vehicles from 1943 to 1958 was won by Bill Wright and Rob Robson in car 41. Class D two-wheel drive 1959 to 1968 was won by John Henry and Bruno Ebenstelli in car 92. Class E 1969 to 1979 was won by Lindsay Keeble in car 46, and Class F 1980 to 1990 was won by Peter and Marianne McDonald in car 16. Now the commercial vehicles, of which there are very few entries, was won by Paul Izzepi in the Blitz. The Supreme Success Awards included the Arabs in car 2 for the Supreme Endeavour Award. The Supreme Fundraiser Award was Ron Oliver in car 1. The Zanius Crew Award again were the Arabs in car 2. And the Zanius Vehicle Award was the Blitz, car 91. In the Tour section, the Grand Endeavour Tour Award was won by John Robertson of car T16, and the Grand Tour Fundraiser was Rod Wade's Model A Ford, driven by the Japanese crew, car T2. Now there were many other awards and there were many other achievements made on the tour, particularly from the earlier vehicles such as Phil Gander's 1926 Plymouth, and of course the Model A Ford of Rod Wade, in simply negotiating an extremely lengthy, gruelling and difficult course. It certainly is a tribute to these old vehicles, to the way in which they were rebuilt and repaired, and to the way in which they were driven, that they were able to cover such a large number of kilometres in such a relatively short time. Now, as I've said before, the Great Endeavour Rally for 1990 was a tremendous amount of fun. A lot of people took part. In fact, around about 150 cars started, and it's remarkable how many of those cars actually finished. But despite all the fun, despite all the kilometres that were driven, the most important thing is the amount of money that was raised for the Endeavour Foundation, and that came through at the grand sum total of $100,000. We'll be back right after this break.